This episode is sponsored by Impulse Artists. Hello, and welcome to 3Q, where I interview industry professionals for just 15 minutes by asking three powerful questions. I'm your host, Rachel Vogel, and joining me for tonight's episode is music publicist and founder of Impulse Artists, Nate Sirotta. Nate has been working in music publicity and marketing for over 12 years. He currently runs Impulse Artists, a boutique PR, marketing, and consulting agency. And throughout his career, he's engaged in over 500 artist campaigns and worked alongside all three major label umbrellas, including a 2-year in-house consulting stint with Universal Music Group. He's also represented independent distributors like AWOL, Symphonic, NVIDIA, and many independent labels like Versewire, Ultra, and Rostrum. Some career highlights include client placements at Rolling Stone, Billboard, MTV, Nylon, Paper Magazine, Alternative Press, and brand plus app collaborations with companies like Journeys, Uber, Shazam, Spotify, and Snapchat. So with all that said, Nate, thanks so much for being here. Super excited to have you on. Welcome to the podcast.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Are you ready to dive into these three questions?
I'm ready.
Let's do it. Imagine for a second you're sitting down with your 25-year-old self. What one piece of advice would you give him on a personal note? And what one piece of advice would you give him from a business perspective?
Yeah, great question. I think honestly, my answers will kind of weave into each other on both the business and personal side, but I do remember very clearly in my mid 20s when I was coming up in the industry, I was kind of hanging on every moment. I was so anxious to make a name for myself at the time, and I really just kind of thought that any of the ebbs and flows were going to have a dramatic effect on my career at large. And it really affected my mental health. Things would happen at work in the office when I was working for other people, and I would make a mistake, or there was a failure, or I had a strange interaction with somebody. And I was always convinced that this was going to be the death of my career at this point. And really, on the business side as well, when I was starting my business, when things are great, you think that they're never going to be bad again. And when things are bad, you think they're never going to be great again. And it's just really part of the ebbs and flows. It's not a linear situation. It never is with career development and business growth. So I think those two things I'd really kind of love to go back and tell myself. I think it would have given me a little more peace of mind and affected my mental health a little more positively.
Great perspective. What interested you in publicity in music? Did you always want to go into music? Were you thinking about being a publicist in a different sector?
I actually did not start in publicity. I started in the mid to late 2000s during the MySpace era as an artist. I was in bands, did a lot of self-marketing, self-touring, and that really sort of gave me the basis for my network in the music industry. Once I was done being in bands, I tried a hand at artist management, and I kind of just took a proactive role and started reaching out to people, and didn't even really know that what I was doing actually was more of a publicist job. Kind of just fell into it that way and realized that I did enjoy it. And from there, I started working for a few different companies and got my feet wet, working for a few more experienced publicists, and eventually became director of digital marketing at a company called Total Assault for a few years. And that kind of just led me on the path that I'm at, where I am now. To be honest, I did not know what a publicist did. I didn't know what that term meant for a long time early when I was playing in bands. I think we had been approached by some sketchy publicists back in the day, and I didn't really know what they did other than like quote unquote promoting artists, which is such a general, vague term. So actually learning that what I was doing as an artist manager was more of a publicist job, because I did not like the day-to-day side of management. So
Mm-hmm.
PR was certainly more in my lane.
Before we jump into the next question, I would love if you could talk a little bit about Impulse. So, how did you go about creating the company? When you made the decision, you were like, this is the time, I'm ready to do it. What were like the first three things that you had to check off the list?
Yeah, so really the company is named because I started the company very impulsively. I think it was in 2012, and I kind of just bought the name and opened up an LLC very impulsively. and knew that it was going to be somewhat centered in PR, but didn't really know how to go about building a clientele and building out like a suite of services and all of those types of things. So I really just used it initially as a means to do some small freelance projects and really just kind of grew from there. So I had to first establish the name, establish, what we were doing and who we were going to work with.
All right, next question. Every industry has its dirty little secrets, and we all know that that is no different in the music industry. Sometimes people think that's a bad thing, but that is not always the case. Sometimes they can be good. What's one secret you would like to share with our listeners about the industry?
Sure, great question. I had spent a lot of time thinking about this. Really, what I thought about was how shocking it is how many people don't really know what they're doing in the industry, or they're kind of faking it until they make it. I have looked back in retrospect to so many specific situations working for different bosses and different people who I really kind of looked up to and thought that every decision that they were making was the correct one. And many of them ended up not being correct, and there is in fact a better way to do that. And you kind of find that out later on. I mean, hindsight's always going to be 2020, but it really is shocking to realize later the lack of knowledge in some areas, and kind of a lot of people are just kind of winging it.
Yeah, that's so true. Speaking of responsibilities, do you think that the role of being a publicist has changed as the industry has kind of evolved into the digital landscape, and how so?
Absolutely. What it means, what publicity means in 2024 is entirely different than what it meant in 2010 or 2014 even. Um, PR has carved out a new place for itself. It used to really be like if you get a song placed on Pitchfork or one of the top tier outlets, it's going to directly convert streams and views and even fans. And it was a primary source for music discovery. And that's really just kind of not the reality anymore. It's really more about the SEO. It's more about the overall profile building, the storytelling, leverage, things like that, branding, and just using it as a marketing driver. Alongside other marketing drivers. Really, there are a lot of misconceptions about press that I feel like I'm constantly having to explain, and it makes sense why. There are unfortunately a lot of publicists who will kind of just take the check, regardless of who the artist is, what the music is like, what the circumstances are. It is a cutthroat industry. So I think a lot of that is just due to the lack of education that a lot of PR people tend to give potential clients. So I try to
Yeah.
be as transparent and realistic as possible, while also being goal oriented, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think you brought up a good point that I feel like not many people understand or even know how it works. How do publicists get paid?
It really depends. There are a few different types of pay structures. Some people just go on kind of a monthly fee or monthly retainer. Others will do more of like an all-in package for a set amount of time. Um, those are kind of the two most common ones. I'm sure that there are other payment structures. I know sometimes people will do trial periods for a month or two and then increase the budget if things are going well, type of thing. So it really just depends on the publicist. It depends on the budget and what the circumstances are.
Yeah.
It tends to be different on a case by case basis.
All right, moving on to the last question. Throughout your career, I can only imagine that you've been asked plenty of questions, whether it was for an industry conference, the media, or maybe a promotion. But throughout all of those interviews and all of those questions, there has to be one that you've never been asked but would have liked to. So, what is that question, and what would be the answer?
I think there tends to be too much of a focus on execution and results when people are asking about PR, like how it works, kind of the mechanics of it. But I think one thing that really gets left out within that is how to create a strong and healthy client dynamic, how to communicate with people effectively, how to be transparent, how to navigate certain situations. And a lot of this tends to play more into like the psychology side of it. It's more about people and how to interact with people. But I think on a professional level, it's important to know how to do that. And that was something that I struggled with early in my career. I definitely had moments where I did not communicate effectively, or I didn't keep my cool if something went wrong. And I think that's a really crucial part of the business, and really, it's not limited to publicity. It really applies across all facets, but in my business, which is strictly client based, I think learning how to create a healthy and strong client dynamic is vital.
Real quick, top of your head, the best clients that you've worked with or your favorite project that you've worked on?
There have been so many over 10 plus years that the company has been running. I would say currently we have the pleasure of doing all the PR for Versewire, which is the new label from Sherry Saidi, Pete Wentz, Mark Hoppus, Nick Littman. We've been so fortunate to work with their whole team and all of their artists, and they are so great in expressing their gratitude for everything that we do. And PR is such a thankless job. I mean, there have been so many great clients, but really it's very thankless at times. And Versewire is certainly one of those clients that really makes you feel appreciated.
With that, Nate, thank you again for joining me. And to everyone listening, hope you enjoyed tonight's episode. Make sure that you stay tuned for next week of 3Q, where I interview industry professionals for just 15 minutes by asking three powerful questions. Before we wrap the episode up, one last reminder, this episode is sponsored by Impulse Artists. See you next time.